You don't overthink because you're weak. You overthink because your mind has spent years living in a war zone, long after the war ended. Overthinking is not noise. It's the echo of every moment you felt unsafe, every time someone made you doubt your own worth, every time love felt conditional. You don't overthink because you enjoy pain. You overthink because, once upon a time, uncertainty was dangerous, and your mind has never forgotten. You see, the body heals, but the mind remembers, and the heart repeats. So now you replay every decision, every conversation, every silence, as if you're searching for a hidden threat. You examine people's words like puzzles. You study their pauses like crimes. You rehearse the future like a battlefield, not because you're dramatic, but because you were trained. By life, by loss, by the people who should have held you gently. Overthinking is your mind whispering, if I can predict everything, maybe I can prevent the next wound. But prediction is not protection, and surviving is not living. This is the story of why your mind overthinks, and why it believes danger lives in every quiet moment. The blueprint of fear. Before you learn to speak, you learn to scan. Long before language shaped your understanding of the world, your survival depended on reading the smallest signals. Faces tightening, voices dropping, footsteps approaching, the sudden shift in a room's temperature. You were too young to interpret meaning, but your body learned anyway. It absorbed the emotional climate like a sponge, cataloging patterns that would later become your instincts. And in that fragile stage of becoming, your nervous system became a silent architect, building structures meant to keep you safe. These structures were not walls or doors. They were blueprints, psychological blueprints, emotional blueprints. Templates for how you would feel, react, love, fear, and protect yourself. If love around you was unstable, the blueprint changed. Your mind learned that affection was conditional, unpredictable, and therefore dangerous to trust. You began to study every shift in tone, every micro-expression, every pause. Because in your small world, these tiny fluctuations were warnings. They were emotional earthquakes. Before anyone called you sensitive, your nervous system was already working overtime, calibrating itself to survive the storms of inconsistency. And if comfort was unpredictable, if safety arrived in fragments or only after chaos, your mind adapted with razor-sharp precision. It learned to anticipate the next threat before it happened. It learned that calm was suspicious, silence was loaded, and peace was just the quiet before something shattered again. Overthinking didn't begin as a flaw. It began as training, a way to stay one step ahead of hurt, a way to decode the unpredictable world you were born into. You didn't choose it, it chose you. Crafted by the environment that shaped your earliest memories. Your mind practiced predicting outcomes because unpredictability once meant pain. It practiced analyzing people's moods because one wrong read could lead to conflict. It rehearsed scenarios because being unprepared once cost you something: love, approval, protection, or the illusion of stability. This is how overthinking became preparation, your earliest and most loyal form of self-defense. It wasn't irrational, it was adaptive, necessary, intelligent. A child who could not run, fight, or leave had only one weapon: awareness. Hyper-awareness. You learned to survive through vigilance, through mental rehearsals, through anticipating every possible outcome, so nothing could ambush you again. And even now, years later, with different people and different circumstances, the blueprint remains. The architecture has not been dismantled. Your mind still scans, because it has not been convinced the danger is gone. It still monitors small shifts in tone, because it remembers what they used to mean. It still examines the energy in rooms because once upon a time, those atmospheres shaped your sense of safety. Overthinking is a ghost story written by the nervous system, a haunting by experiences you didn't choose but internalized anyway. And until you rewrite the blueprint, your mind will continue confusing vigilance for protection, preparation for survival, and fear for foresight. Trauma imprinting, the silent teacher. Trauma doesn't always arrive with noise. It doesn't always come in explosions, shattered glass, or dramatic scenes worth remembering. More often, trauma is quiet. It slips into the body like cold air through a cracked window. Unnoticed, but unforgettable. Trauma doesn't scream. It imprints. It stamps itself onto your nervous system in ways you don't immediately understand. You carry it not as memories but as sensations. The tightening in your chest when someone raises their voice. The knot in your throat when someone pauses too long before responding. The sudden collapse inside you when you sense rejection, even if none is intended. It's in the pauses between words, the heaviness in unspoken moments, the tension beneath your ribs that you can't explain. These imprints form an emotional map your mind keeps following long after the original danger has passed. Trauma leaves fingerprints, pressed gently but permanently, into the wet cement of your early experiences. Once the cement dries, the marks remain. You grow older, but those inner prints do not age with you. They stay frozen in time, quietly influencing how you perceive the world. And so your mind, without meaning to, begins to judge every new situation through an ancient lens. Something happens today, but you react with emotions that belonged to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or even childhood itself. Your system doesn't differentiate between past and present. It only remembers patterns. It only recognizes familiar danger. This is why a small text left on "seen" can feel like abandonment. Not because the person ignored you maliciously, but because being ignored once meant something devastating to you. This is why a slight shift in someone's tone can feel like a storm is coming. Not because the present person intends harm, but because you were trained to fear sudden changes. They once signaled pain, conflict, rejection, or chaos. Your mind is not reacting to them. It's reacting to them. Trauma teaches you lessons you never asked to learn. It teaches you to anticipate hurt before it happens. It teaches you to prepare for loss even in the middle of love. It teaches you to distrust peace because peace was so often the fragile moment right before something broke. In this way, trauma becomes a silent teacher, one that continues to instruct you through instinct, impulse, and fear. Old wounds become lenses, old confusion becomes instinct, old pain becomes prophecy. And the most haunting part is this: your body remembers, even when your mind pretends it has forgotten. You walk into new chapters carrying emotional scripts written long ago. New people, new relationships, new opportunities, but the same internal story. Old wounds, new characters, same script. You think you're reacting to the present, but you're actually responding to echoes of your past. Until you learn to recognize the imprint, you can't rewrite the pattern. But when you finally see it, when you realize that your fear belongs to an older version of you, you begin reclaiming yourself from the quiet teacher who shaped you without words. Attachment theory. The hungry heart and anxious mind is not a flaw, a weakness, or a personality defect. It is simply a child, still living inside you, searching for the steady arms it never consistently felt. Long before you learned how to think, you learned how to attach. And attachment is not intellectual, it is biological, instinctive, survival-driven. A child does not analyze love, it depends on it. A child does not question closeness, it needs it to live. But when the people responsible for giving you emotional safety were unpredictable, distant, inconsistent, absorbed in their own winds, or simply overwhelmed by life, your heart learned to stay hungry. Hungry for reassurance, for presence, for stability. Hungry for a kind of love that didn't require decoding. You weren't overdramatic, you were under-reassured. You asked for comfort in ways children ask, through tears, through closeness, through fear, through silence. And when comfort didn't come often enough, your mind began shaping its own tools to survive the emotional famine. The nervous system, confused but desperate, began building strategies that felt like instinct. Analyze, predict, chase certainty. You analyzed every shift in someone's tone, trying to guess whether love was still safe. You predicted emotional storms because being surprised once had hurt too much. You chased certainty because uncertainty had become synonymous with danger. These strategies grew with you. They matured as you matured. They followed you into friendships, relationships, work, and self-perception. What began as a child's survival instinct slowly became an adult's thinking style, one that felt exhausting, confusing, and overwhelming, but strangely familiar. That's the nature of attachment wounds. They don't vanish, they continue shaping your emotional logic. You call it overthinking, but psychology calls it protection. Your mind isn't trying to annoy you, it's trying to protect you from the emotional instability you once lived through. It's trying to make sure you never feel that forgotten loneliness again. It's trying to predict rejection so you don't crumble when it comes. It's trying to stay ahead of loss so loss can't break you like it once did. Overthinking is simply the adult language of your inner child's fear of being left, ignored, forgotten, or replaced. Your child self calls this survival, because that's what it was. An anxious attachment system is not dramatic, it is vigilant. It watches for danger because danger once lived in the very place love was supposed to live. When the same person who held you was also the one who frightened you, emotionally or energetically, the mind learned to stay half safe, half alert, and so you grew into someone who can love deeply yet fear losing that love at the same time. You can trust someone yet question every silence. You can feel close yet anticipate distance. The heart reaches forward while the mind pulls back. Attachment shapes how you love, how you fear, how you connect, how you read the world. And until you understand this hungry heart, this younger version of you still seeking what it never fully received, you will judge yourself for behaviors that were never flaws, only adaptations. You are not too much. You are simply someone who learned to survive without steady arms, and is still learning what it feels like to finally feel safe. Repetition, compulsion, the echoing loop, Jung said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. There is a brutal, haunting truth inside this sentence. It means that the parts of you that were shaped in darkness, the wounds you never looked at, the fears you never named, the patterns you never questioned, become the secret authors of your life. They write your reactions. They choose your relationships. They recreate your pain in familiar shapes, leading you back into the same emotional storms you thought you had escaped. Not because you want them, but because your psyche is trying, desperately, compulsively, to resolve something it could never resolve in the past. This is the essence of repetition, compulsion. The unconscious urge to recreate old wounds with new characters, hoping that this time the ending will be different. It's not masochism. It's not stupidity. It's a psychological loop born from unfinished emotional truths. You find yourself drawn to the same type of person who once hurt you, not because you enjoy suffering, but because your mind is trying to rewrite the story. Your psyche is replaying an old script, hoping you will finally gain control over a narrative where you once had none. So you return again and again to relationships that feel eerily familiar. You react to neutral situations with disproportionate fear. You interpret small disappointments as catastrophic losses. And without realizing it, you continue repeating the past, mistaking its echoes for intuition. You don't choose these loops, they choose you. They arise from the unresolved corners of your inner world, your shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of you that was buried because it was too painful to face. But the buried doesn't disappear, it resurfaces in disguise. It returns as emotional triggers, as irrational attachment, as fear of abandonment, as attraction to the wrong people, as self-sabotage, as inexplicable anxiety. The shadow knocks on your life again and again, demanding recognition, and when you ignore it, it repeats itself in louder and more disruptive forms. Repetition, compulsion is your unconscious saying, "We are not done. Look again, heal this." But healing requires awareness. It requires the courage to identify the original wound behind the recurring pain. Until then, the loops continue like a haunting melody that always returns to the same unresolved note. You call these patterns bad luck, fate, I attract the wrong people, or I ruin everything. But they are simply unhealed stories replaying themselves until you finally confront the shadow that created them. When you bring these unconscious patterns into the light, when you understand the origin instead of blaming the outcome, the loop weakens. And every time you choose differently, respond differently, see differently, a piece of the cycle breaks. Repetition, compulsion is not a curse, it is an invitation to stop running, to stop repeating, to finally stand in the place where the wound began and give your younger self what they never received: understanding, compassion, and the freedom to stop reliving the same pain disguised as destiny. Desire as wounded longing, the people you crave, the things you chase, the validation you seek. They rarely come from pure desire. They come from the ache beneath it, from the forgotten places inside you that were never fully seen, never fully held, never fully understood. What you call desire is often a reenactment, a psychological echo of what your younger self needed but never received. And so, without realizing it, you pursue not the person, not the goal, not the attention, but the emotional correction your inner child has been waiting decades to experience. Unresolved childhood wounds have a way of disguising themselves inside adult relationships. They wear masks of attraction, longing, obsession, infatuation, or ambition. You think you want them, but you want what their presence symbolizes: healing, closure, completion. You think you are drawn to someone because they're special, magnetic, unique. But often you're drawn to them because something about them resembles the emotional landscape of your past. Familiar enough to awaken the old wound, hopeful enough to make you believe that maybe this time, the ending will be different. This is why unhealthy attraction feels intoxicating. It is not chemistry, it is recognition. Not fate, but memory. You don't want love, you want repair. You want someone to do what no one ever did: stay, choose you, understand you without needing explanations, treat you gently without you having to earn it. You want someone who won't disappear when you're vulnerable, who won't punish you for needing closeness, who won't turn your longing into a burden. Love is not the hunger. You're hungry for the safety love was supposed to bring. You don't want attention, you want proof. Proof that the original story your life wrote about you was wrong. Proof that you are not forgettable, not too much, not unlovable, not invisible. When someone gives you attention, it's not their eyes you crave, it's the rewriting of your emotional history. Their presence becomes evidence that the neglect or inconsistency of your past was not your fault, that you were worthy all along, that someone can choose you voluntarily, not reluctantly, not accidentally. This is why emotional hunger is so powerful. It doesn't speak the language of adulthood, it speaks the language of childhood wounds. And your mind, loyal to its earliest experiences, keeps searching for the person who will stay where others walked away, who will embrace the parts of you that were dismissed, who will repair the damage left by those who were supposed to love you but couldn't, wouldn't, or didn't know how. Your mind overthinks because it is still waiting for someone to stay this time. Overthinking is not fear of the present moment, it is fear of repetition, fear that the pattern will replay itself, fear that once again, someone important will slip through your fingers, fear that history is stronger than hope. But desire becomes healthier when you finally see it for what it is, a longing for emotional justice, a longing for a moment where the story changes. And that moment begins not when someone else arrives, but when you recognize the wound behind your craving, and give yourself what the past never could. The shadow you avoid. Your shadow is not a monster, it is a museum. A quiet, dimly lit place inside you where all the parts you were taught to hide have been stored away. Your neediness, your fear, your anger, your longing, your shame, your sensitivity, your softness, your rage. These pieces of you did not disappear, they were exiled. You learned, through family, culture, religion, relationships, or early emotional experiences, that certain emotions were unacceptable, inconvenient, or too much. So you pushed them down, buried them beneath forced strength, politeness, perfection, compliance, or silence. You told yourself you had moved on, that you had grown, that you had outgrown the child who once felt so deeply. But the shadow is patient. It waits for the moment you can no longer pretend. What you suppress does not die, it transforms. It grows roots in the unconscious and returns in unexpected ways. The neediness you rejected becomes your fear of abandonment. The anger you swallowed becomes anxiety that has no clear source. The sadness you ignored becomes numbness. The longing you were ashamed of becomes an ache you feel in quiet rooms, in unanswered messages, in relationships where you cling too tightly or detach too quickly. These emotions leak out through overthinking, because overthinking is the mind trying to process what the heart was forbidden to express. Overthinking is not a flaw, it is an overflow, a signal that something buried is trying to surface. When you spiral into what-ifs, when you replay conversations, when you analyze people's silences, when you prepare for catastrophes that never come, it is often your shadow speaking in disguise. It is telling you, there is something inside you that needs attention. But instead of listening, you judge yourself. You call yourself dramatic, sensitive, emotional, irrational. You treat your own hurt with the same rejection you once received. And the shadow, still unacknowledged, keeps pushing back harder. It shows up in your patterns, in your triggers, in your insecurities, in your attraction to emotionally unavailable people, in your perfectionism, in your self-sabotage. The shadow refuses to be forgotten because it contains truths too important to abandon. Shadow work is not about fighting your darkness, it's about giving it a voice. It is realizing that the feelings you hide are simply emotions that were never allowed to exist safely. It is understanding that your flaws are actually wounds, and your wounds are actually stories. To do shadow work is to sit with the parts of you you once rejected and say, I see you now. You're allowed to exist. Only what is acknowledged can be healed. Denial keeps wounds frozen in time. Acceptance melts them back into motion. When you invite your shadow into the light, it stops haunting you. It stops dictating your behaviors from behind the scenes. It stops hijacking your relationships, your decisions, your identity. You begin to realize that the darkness you feared was never your enemy. It was the younger, softer, unprotected version of you calling for compassion. The shadow is not the part of you that is broken. It is the part of you that has been waiting the longest to be understood. The path out of the maze freedom begins in a quiet, subtle moment, the moment you stop asking your mind to protect you from ghosts, because that's what most of your fear is: echoes, not threats. Old voices, not present danger. Memories disguised as intuition. For years, your mind has acted like a loyal guard dog, barking at every shadow, trembling at every unfamiliar sound, warning you of storms that no longer exist. It learned to do this because once upon a time, the danger was real, the hurt was real, the unpredictability was real. But the tragedy is that your mind continued the fight long after the battlefield was gone. Healing begins when you gently take its shaking hands in yours and whisper, it's safe now. You don't need to keep watch anymore. A freedom grows deeper when you stop rehearsing pain that hasn't happened. Overthinking is a rehearsal, your mind running simulations of heartbreak, abandonment, rejection, humiliation, disappointment. It believes preparation will soften the blow, that if you can predict the pain, it will hurt less. But rehearsing pain doesn't prevent it, it only makes you live it before it even arrives. It robs you twice, once in imagination, once in reality. The path out of the maze is realizing that anticipating pain does not protect you. It exhausts you. It drains the life out of the very moments that are meant to be peaceful. Another step toward freedom is stopping the silent punishment you inflict on yourself for wounds you didn't cause. You blame yourself for being anxious, for being too sensitive, for wanting reassurance, for fearing abandonment. But you didn't choose these patterns. They were shaped by circumstances outside your control. They were built in environments where emotional safety was inconsistent or absent. Your heart adapted the only way it knew. Punishing yourself for adaptations that once kept you alive is like scolding a child for flinching after being frightened. You deserve compassion, not criticism. Gentleness, not shame. Your mind overthinks because it never felt safe. That is the origin of almost everything safety, or the lack of it. A nervous system shaped by fear cannot transform through force. It transforms through tenderness. Your healing begins when you teach your mind, slowly, gently, that it finally is. When you treat yourself the way someone should have treated you long ago, with patience, warmth, and understanding. When you replace self-judgment with curiosity, self-criticism with compassion, self-blame with truth. Healing is not a dramatic event, it is a quiet reparenting. A gradual shift in how you respond to your own fear. It looks like noticing your spiraling thoughts and saying, "I know why you're afraid." It looks like breathing into the panic instead of battling it. It looks like challenging the old belief that disaster is inevitable. It looks like letting yourself rest, even when your mind tells you danger is coming. It looks like giving your nervous system the experiences it never had: calm, consistency, presence, safety. The path out of the maze is not about escaping. It's about turning on the light inside it. And when you finally do, you realize the walls were never as solid as they felt. The way out was never outside you. It was through you. Through awareness, through compassion, through the gentle, patient teaching of a mind that has been trying to protect you for far too long. And when safety finally becomes familiar instead of foreign, the maze loses its power. The ghosts lose their shape, the fear loses its voice, and you finally, quietly, come home to yourself. In the end, your mind isn't your enemy. It's the wounded guardian that never stopped trying to protect you. Heal the wound, and the fear loses its echo. Face the shadow and the maze collapses. When you finally choose gentleness over survival, you don't just quiet the overthinking. You free the version of you that's been waiting to breathe.